honored to have Dr. Patrick Awuah, founder and president of Assisi University, to deliver the keynote address for the convening. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me with a standing ovation to welcome Dr. Patrick Awuah on stage.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. The topic for my remarks this afternoon is building an ecosystem of excellence for leadership. And I think it's a really auspicious year for us to be meeting here at the West Africa Hub. The African Union is called 2024 the year of education for the continent, and they're going to really focus a lot of their initiatives around education. So it's good that we're here today. I want to talk first about, well, there are three words in this title: ecosystem, excellence, leadership, that I want to really focus on as I engage you in this conversation this afternoon. Let's talk about ecosystems. What are the characteristics of resilient ecosystems? It's important that we're here today as a collaborative, because a few years ago, people would ask me, what are you going to do at Ashesi University to scale Ashesi University? There were people asking us to set up campuses around the continent. And there were funders or potential funders who kept asking me, how do you grow really big? And my answer was, well, we really shouldn't be thinking about one institution. We should think about an ecosystem. We should think about a continent. And if we really want to scale, no one institution can scale to the size of the challenge, but all our institutions together can scale to the size of the challenge. And so this is what we should do. And so I put together a presentation to try to answer the question, what are the characteristics of a resilient ecosystem? Because that's what we need. And here are the answers that I came to. The first is diversity. When you look at an ecosystem that is thriving, that is able to resist shocks, and continue on in spite of changing climates and so on, that ecosystem likely has a lot of diversity of species. Another characteristic of resilient ecosystems is modularity and coupling, right? So you'll see that the various species within this ecosystem are somehow coupled with each other. There's symbiotic relationships, there's parasitic relationships, there are all kinds of relationships that enable species to sort of replicate themselves. And then there's modularity, so that if something goes wrong with one entity within the ecosystem, it doesn't necessarily bring everything else down. So modularity and coupling. The third is buffers. Resilient ecosystems have buffers. So in the case of organic species, you'll think about buffers of water, buffers of genetic material like seed, and so on. And then the fourth is adaptation to change. And in the natural ecosystem, adaptation is of two kinds. You know, you have intelligent species that are sort of making decisions and navigating the world. And then you just have basically random change. At least that's what we call it. We call it random change. But actually what nature is doing is it's constantly searching for different solutions. And it turns out that some of the things that different species discover in that search actually enable them to survive when something changes in their environment. So if we want to build resilience and excellence in our educational ecosystem, we must have diversity, we must have modularity with coupling, we must have buffers, and we must have adaptation. In our case, adaptation is R&D, it's innovation, it's exploration, like nature does, searching. And sometimes it's just randomness, and that's fine. Now, we want to be an ecosystem of excellence. So let's talk about excellence for a minute. I think that excellence is best understood or talked about within a context. So excellence for a task at hand, excellence for a challenge, excellence for an opportunity, and that's how we should think about it. And I would suggest that the task at hand, the grand challenge of our time today, is the challenge of development in Africa. And it's a different challenge than, say, 70 years ago. There was a challenge of emerging out of a colonial state into an independent state. That was the challenge of the time. Today, the grand challenge of our time is development. And by that, I mean Africa's advance in the world. A few years ago, I was at a conference in Copenhagen, and a question was asked. We had this workshop, and a question was asked, what is the idea that you believe in that most people would hear and say that is a crazy idea? Like, what is the idea that you don't think is so crazy that everybody else thinks it's crazy? And we went around the table and different people had their ideas, and they were mostly not that crazy. So it got to my turn, and I said, the idea that I have, and I think this will happen in the history of humanity, but I think most people today would consider crazy, is that the day will come when humans will travel the earth without the need for visas. That the borders will all be softened and dissolved, and people will move freely in the world. And everybody at the table said, that is the craziest idea we've heard. And this is what they said. That, Patrick, you win. This qualifies as a crazy idea. And I said, actually, it is not a crazy idea. It is an optimistic idea. We will stop using visas when we no longer need them. We will stop using visas when there is zero net migration around the world, which means as many people want to travel from North America to Europe as the other way, as many people want to travel from Africa to Asia as the other way, as many people want to travel from Latin America to Africa or to Europe as the other way. And this will happen when all societies on earth are flourishing. Now, the idea that I suggested, I said, if you think about it, 70 years ago, if I would have said to you that the average Singaporean citizen will travel the earth without needing visas to travel anywhere on earth, people would have said that's a crazy idea. But today, Singaporeans travel without visa restrictions. Why? Because the country is flourishing. They don't really need to migrate anywhere. As many people from Singapore want to travel outside of Singapore as want to travel to Singapore. And for me, this notion of visa-free travel is actually a trailing indicator of human flourishing. And we must believe that this will happen. It won't happen by accident, but that is the challenge of our time. So development in Africa, for me, means a flourishing Africa. And how we achieve this, that is what we need to be excellent about. Now, what is our context today? We have the youngest population on Earth, demographically. We're growing faster than anywhere else on Earth. So there's going to be 1 billion more people in 30 years. There's going to be 1 billion more people within a generation. There's climate change. There's artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution technologies. There is a new continental free trade agreement. There are other things. There are wars going on our continent. There's strife. There's economic turmoil in parts of our continent. Most Africans do not have visa-free travel on Earth. This is our context. And if we're to achieve this notion that we will advance and be equal in the world, it will require a determined effort. And it will require a determined effort by all of us. And I want to talk about what I think that it's going to require and why our work in education is so important. The first thing it's going to require, I think, is leadership excellence. Leaders, or the best leaders, are people who help others to be more successful. The best leaders are those who will help their societies to be more successful. We will need a well-educated workforce. We will need global connections and global competitiveness. We will need a lot of innovation. Now, leadership excellence, I would say, is about mindset. It's about an ongoing dialogue that leads to consensus. It's about skill. But all of the things that I just listed, leadership, a strong workforce, global connectivity and innovation, all of that requires continuous learning. And you will recognize, as I describe these things, that all of these things are the business of education. This is our work. We educate, if we look in our countries, the people who are leading our countries, the people who are leading important institutions, important organizations in our countries, all of them pass through a university classroom. All of them were engaged in university labs. They're people that our predecessors in education educated. And the people who will be leading this continent 20 years from now are sitting in our classrooms today. Today. The people who are leading our countries now can also be invited back into our classrooms today, so they create the world or the Africa that is ready for 1 billion more people. So it's a huge challenge. It's a big task. None of us alone can do it, but all of us together can. And we have to first achieve excellence in our ability to collaborate with each other, and we have to achieve excellence in the work that we do so that we can build excellence within our leadership and the population at large. Now, we'll do this for our students. We should. We can do it for ourselves to improve the leadership within our own institution, and we can do it for the public and the private sector leaders of today. So here's a thought exercise, a thought experiment. If you think about other societies and how they're operating, let's say the higher ed system in the United States or the West, and how they operate. They have institutions of incredible excellence. They have buffers of financial resources and intellectual resources that enable these institutions to do great work over a long period of time. And they have an active dialogue with each other that actually builds consensus. So, for example, the Chronicle of Higher Education is a publication that educators in America all read constantly. It shapes the direction of what they're doing. They have, government policies around the need to drive research that really is sort of established consensus. They have corporations that engage with universities in a way that enables them to develop, the human capital that these organizations need. And there's a consensus around that. How do we achieve that here? What should we be doing? What publications should we be putting out? Practitioner publications like the Chronicle of Higher Education for Africa that helps us build that consensus, that helps policymakers build a consensus. What could we be doing with, say, governance? I think about, the United States, they have organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations. It has a publication called Foreign Affairs. And in this publication, there are professors and researchers and practitioners who are deeply studying issues. They're writing opinion pieces, they're debating, and when they come to some consensus, they publish it in the Foreign Affairs magazine. And it becomes part of the roadmap for how policy is executed. Why don't we have that for Africa? What is the policy consensus for development in Nigeria? What is the policy consensus for development in Ghana, for South Africa, for Ethiopia, for Rwanda? What is the policy consensus for development in Africa? And who's driving that? I would argue that we in academia should be a very big part of driving that by doing two things. One is inviting the leaders of public sector, private sector, academia, social sector back into our classrooms in executive seminars so they're engaging with each other. The second is that we are publishing in magazines that the average person will read, not just us academics, that the media will read, and that will help drive a policy consensus. And we should do that for ourselves as well. One of the things that I think about these days, actually I've been thinking about it for the last 10 years, is succession planning. As the founder of a young institution, I'm keenly aware that I have an expiration date. There will be a day when I retire from my current job, and there will be a day when I'll retire from Earth. And yet, Ashesi University must continue with excellence, must continue with even more excellence than when I was here. How do we get there? And this is true for every institution present here. We ought to be educating the next generation of leaders in our institution. And it's not about just academic publishing. It's about management, it's about leadership, it's about executive seminars. And so if we want to build excellence, these are some of the things that we should do. I've already touched on leadership because I have this habit of whenever I talk about excellence, leadership creeps into it anyway. Because it is so important. Leaders help set a direction. And I just want to end with the words of an Asian philosopher who said that when a great leader's work is done, mission accomplished, the people will say, we did it ourselves. And this is so true for all of us here. When our mission is accomplished, when our work is done, when our object is achieved, when we have achieved a flourishing Africa, the people of Africa will say, we did it ourselves. Thank you.